There are 24 candidates in the 2020 Democratic presidential field, and that number could still grow. Former Georgia State House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams has yet to say whether or not she'll enter the race. During the Cap Ideas Fest earlier today, she again deferred on making an announcement, but joked about how large the Democratic field is.
We still grapple with access to health care, and we still question whether or not the climate is changing, because leaders are being elected who not only reject science, but reject the voices of the people they were elected to represent. But I'm here to tell you there's a solution. It is not, however, having everyone in America run for president.
Okay, let's bring in CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. She is in Washington. So, Caitlin, when can we expect Stacey Abrams to make an announcement? And do we know what might be holding her up?
Well, she has already passed on running for the Senate in Georgia, and she has said before that she wants to potentially run for something this time around. But she has also said that she could afford to wait until later this year to see whether she would actually get in. She could wait and see what the debates look like, whether that helps to winnow the field and create more of an opportunity for her. But she has been speaking in front of audiences like this one. She has been frequently mentioned by voters on the trail and by those watching this race, wondering whether she'll get in. And after her run in Georgia for the governor's race, she's really focused her efforts on voting rights. And as we know, that's an issue that is really critical in this Democratic primary. We're hearing lots of candidates already in this race talking about this issue. She has really carved out a lane for herself in the party as someone leading the charge on this issue. The big question is whether she makes that her calling card in the presidential race.
Well, is there still room for her to stand out in a crowded Democratic field?
It is really crowded, but she does have the benefit of having perhaps more of a name recognition and being on the national stage. Remember, she gave that rebuttal to the State of the Union address by the president earlier this year. It's a really tough position to be in, but she seemed to have won a lot of praise from both sides of the aisle for her response and the way she talked about certain issues that are affecting various communities, especially those in the Democratic primary. And so she has this national identity, really. The big question is whether the field winnows by the time she makes her decision.
Well, another Democrat who spoke at this forum is Montana Senator Jon Tester. Let's play some of what he said.
When I ran, Trump come to my state 4 times. Pence came 3 times. They tried to make little Donald came a whole bunch of times. He's thinking about running for governor in Montana. But the fact is that I didn't waver. I stayed with what I had done for the last 2 terms before that. We talked about what was important to rural America. We talked about health care. We talked about education. We talked about infrastructure. We even talked about climate change. And I'm going to tell you, in the end, when the distorted view was put forth and people went to the ballot box, they said, you know what? We know who Jon Tester is, and that's who they voted for.
Do we know, Caitlin, does Jon Tester have a plan to enter this presidential race?
Well, I know this seems like the why not me primary, but it would be very difficult to see someone like Jon Tester getting in because he was just recently reelected in November in Montana, getting just a little bit over 50% of the vote, which is a good showing for Democrats there. I think the argument that he was trying to make in front of this audience, it comes at a time that Democrats are trying to figure out whether they can do 2 things at once, whether they can reach back and gain back voters that chose Obama, then chose Trump in 2016, or whether they should focus on other kind of states that are growing, the demographics are growing in favor of Democrats. And Jon Tester here seemed to say that Democrats can kind of do both at the same time, that with Democrats like him, they can reach out to the rural communities, but also talk about things that are important to the party, like health care and access to health care coverage. And so I think Jon Tester could play an important role in helping Democrats kind of broaden their reach a little bit.
Well, let's turn to some candidates who are in the race, starting with Beto O'Rourke. He did a CNN town hall yesterday. O'Rourke has been looking for a so-called restart to his campaign. What's your assessment of his performance?
You know, what I saw last night in the CNN town hall was really what I have seen watching him on the campaign trail. He has done about 150 town halls really across the country, and at each of them he takes questions from the audience and then he talks to the press afterwards. I've seen him remember the names of voters who have asked him questions when they come to ask to take a photo with him. So I saw that last night, and I also saw this recognition by the campaign that what they are doing, what they have been doing so far, isn't getting them to where they want to be. There was this recognition within the campaign that they had to do more of a national media campaign. And you see these candidates doing these televised town halls, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. The most important reason, though, is to be able to garner some attention, stand out in this crowded field that's already, the media market is very saturated by these candidates already, and to be able to use these moments to raise more money. You saw Beto O'Rourke immediately craft a fundraising pitch around this town hall, and that's really what candidates are looking for. They're looking to stand out, but they're looking for those standout moments really to help them raise money, to gain more momentum, and to continue on in this race.
Well, O'Rourke announced a plan to protect abortion rights at the town hall. Let's play some of that.
For so long, women have been leading this fight, shouldering the burden of making sure that their reproductive rights are protected. It's time that all of us join them in this fight. As president, I will make sure that every nominee to every federal bench, including the Supreme Court, understands and believes that the 1973 decision, Roe versus Wade, is the settled law of the land.
So other candidates, such as Senator Cory Booker and Julian Castro, have just announced plans to protect abortion rights, and former Vice President Joe Biden said he'd support legislation to protect Roe v. Wade. Can we expect Democratic candidates to prioritize this issue of abortion?
Oh, certainly. I think we are seeing kind of a turning point in presidential politics for Democrats, where they are starting to really rally around this idea of coming up with some proposals related to abortion, but really rallying around the idea of the importance of the Supreme Court. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York has really been out front on this issue. She called for an establishment of a litmus test for candidates to the Supreme Court, saying that they should voice their support for Roe v. Wade in order to be considered. You've had other candidates now talking about different items that they would like to prioritize when it comes to responding to these issues at the state level. All things from making Roe v. Wade the law of the land to repealing regulations passed during the Trump administration. And last week, when you and I were talking about the Democratic response, we were waiting to see what policy would follow up with that, and we're starting to see that this week from the candidates.
Well, speaking of Joe Biden, he hit back at President Trump's jabs about him leaving Pennsylvania as a child, saying his dad had to leave because there were no jobs. Will Biden try to emphasize working class roots on the campaign trail?
Absolutely, and he's trying to do it in places like Pennsylvania. I think we got what could be a preview potentially if Biden, big if, is the nominee against Donald Trump. They were both in Pennsylvania this week. Biden, of course, officially launching his campaign in Philadelphia, and then President Trump campaigning in Pennsylvania as well, really having Biden in his head and kind of elevating him as the front runner. And they are competing for similar votes. That's been part of Biden's pitch, is that he can gain back some of those Democrats that the party lost in 2016. And so I think this is a preview of something we're going to see over the next several weeks.
Well, I want to play more of your interview with former South Dakota Democratic Senator Tom Daschle. You asked him about his endorsement in 2020.
In 2008, in the 2008 campaign, you were a very early supporter of then Senator Barack Obama. This time around, though, you are supporting Joe Biden. It's such a diverse field and a lot of new, fresher faces on the scene. Why support Biden?
Well, I support Joe Biden in part because I know him so well and I've worked with him for so long. I have so much respect for his ability, his experience. And I think at this point, as we've seen for the last several years, coming to Washington and working in a position of authority like the presidency, without any experience at all, causes me to wonder whether we want to continue that practice. Joe Biden brings enormous experience to the table, enormous wherewithal with regard to the many challenges we're facing both domestically and in foreign policy. So it seems to me that the key word this time is going to be experience, and Joe Biden has it.
So, Caitlin, let me ask you, based on your reporting on this question of experience, does Tom Daschle have a point there?
Well, the reason that I asked the former Senate Majority Leader about this is because in 2008, he endorsed Obama, who was a real upstart candidate, a real long shot candidate, but trying to put forth this message of new ideas and a fresh face. This time around, you have a lot of other candidates who are trying to kind of replicate at least some of that that Obama was able to do and some of that appeal. So it was interesting that he, right out of the gate, is supporting Joe Biden, given that he has come under scrutiny for whether he is representative of kind of the new Democratic Party. But what we are hearing from voters is that they want someone who can defeat Donald Trump, and they're seeing a contrast that Joe Biden is waging against the current president that is experience and someone who can kind of right the course in their view from what they've seen over the past couple of years. That could work, however, to his disadvantage, because I've talked to allies of the current president who say that Trump can use Biden as a foil, as someone he can say, look, this is someone who represented Washington and everything I ran against the first time around for so long. So we'll see kind of how voters start to assess that as they see more of Biden on the trail.
Finally, Caitlin, I want to ask you about a proposal by California Democratic Senator Kamala Harris to help reduce the maternal mortality rate among Black women. We know about the critical role Black women play in Democratic primaries. How big of an issue is this for that group?
It is really emerging as a key 2020 campaign issue. The CDC came out with a report earlier this month saying that 700 women in America die from pregnancy-related complications, but Black women are 3 times more likely than white women to die from pregnancy-related complications. And we've seen some really high-profile celebrities talk a lot about this, Serena Williams as an example. But we're also seeing 2020 candidates respond to this with legislation or policy proposals. Kamala Harris is re-upping a bill that she had. Cory Booker has also introduced legislation. And Elizabeth Warren, when I followed her in Houston last month, talked a lot about this and was very well received for her policy proposals as well. So this is going to be something that we should be keeping an eye on, how candidates respond to this, but also an issue that women voters care a lot about, and especially Black women voters who are really driving and fueling the Democratic Party right now, at least in the primary so far.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington for us. Caitlin, thank you.
Thank you.